Hello, Screen Junkies. It's Monday afternoon, and that means it's time to chart with Mr. Dan Murrell. Let's talk box office.
What an up and down weekend it was, Ross.
Wow.
Friday, all of the trades had declared Rampage second place, and A Quiet Place had taken number one. And then Saturday, Rampage actually did really, really well. And then they all backtracked and said, never mind, Rampage is number one. And Rampage actually came in, and this is rare, above even the projections that they gave for Sunday, which means that, we'll talk about this because the Rampage is a very complicated case of how was the opening, was it good enough, and what is it going to do in the face of Infinity War, which every movie has to worry about in a couple weeks. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about the top five.
Let's talk about The Rock. Man, he was promoting the heck out of this movie.
And that's what he does.
And that's what he does, and he really, really, really wanted it to take that one slot. But
well, it looks. We talked about this at the end of last week's show, Roth. You said, what are the chances that A Quiet Place stays in the number one spot? And I said it's very unlikely. A Quiet Place would have to hold really well, and Rampage would have to significantly underperform. Well, it turns out, believe it or not, A Quiet Place held really well. It dropped 34%, which for any movie is great. For a horror movie is phenomenal. And Rampage was tracking at $35 to $40 million. So both things turned out to be true. A Quiet Place did hold really well. Rampage did underperform based on its tracking, and it very nearly lost that number one spot. What saved it was Saturday. It surged 20% on Saturday over Friday, which says two things. Number one, people were taking their kids. And number two, good word of mouth. It had an A- cinema score. That's a good sign for a movie of that type going forward because the reviews weren't great. But there's a lot to still say about Rampage. Yeah. But it's number one for now.
It's an interesting case because they are two very different kinds of movies, clearly.
Yes.
Day and night, even. And I would say this, what I understand about that number, I'm really impressed with A Quiet Place. So I don't think that we can eliminate how impressive it is performing.
Oh, no.
But do you think that it's partially that not just The Rock, but Rampage is just a dumb, fun movie, escapist, pure escapist?
It is.
A Quiet Place demands something of you as an audience. Perhaps people just weren't into that as much as they were having a little bit of escape and time away from their troubles.
Oh yeah, A Quiet Place, it's an ordeal. I mean, you have to take a nap before and after seeing A Quiet Place. At Rampage, you can just literally turn off every system that your body has and just sit back and watch it. And I think that's what people kind of heard was they heard that, like, hey, this is a great time at the movies. This is just a big, dumb,
I just like
fun
that you
movie.
made it quite literal. Like, I want to see your little dad nap.
Yes, I was exhausted after A Quiet Place. However, we shouldn't overlook how well it did. Like I said, it dropped just 34%. Had a better per screen average actually than Rampage. It was playing on fewer screens, which means and it added screens in its second weekend. Again, that's a sign that a movie's doing really well. It hit $100 million in 10 days. That is faster than Ready Player One hit $100 million. It's now tracking ahead of movies like Split and The Conjuring. It's headed for $150 million, probably at least off a budget of less than $20 million. We talked about how much Paramount needed it. The news keeps getting better and better for Paramount because A Quiet Place, not just a big opener, really holding well, and one of the surprise hits of the year.
Really interesting to see how this does in terms of return on investment at the end of the year. Speaking of, this isn't a Blumhouse movie, but the masters of return on investment are Blumhouse usually,
and Truth or Dare, same old Blumhouse. Truth or Dare, third place debut, bad reviews, really not great reviews, a B- cinema score, not exactly what you want. However, it did the opposite of Rampage. It dropped 17% on Saturday, but it had a not bad Friday, capitalizing on the whole Friday the 13th opening. Happy Death Day, Blumhouse also opened on Friday the 13th, so its Friday was its best day. I think they probably knew that word of mouth was not going to be great on that. So it debuted in third place, but I want to take a look, speaking of Blumhouse, I want to take a look at their last 5 wide releases. When I say wide, I mean 3,000 plus screens, which right now is, when we're talking super wide, that's about where you're headed. I want to take a look at their last 5, and as you can see, each one of these opening weekend, these aren't final grosses, opening weekend, they're all opening up 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6 times the budget. As you can see, Truth or Dare had a budget of $3.5 million. So it doesn't matter what the critics had to say, and it doesn't matter what the audiences have to say anymore, because guess what? It made its money back. Despite being the lowest opening of the last 5 super wide openings for Blumhouse films, they're sitting pretty.
It
doesn't
more than
matter
made its
at this
money
point.
back.
It
Yeah.
more than made its money back.
Yeah, and then they get hits. And that's the thing is like they're banking on once or twice a year getting a massive hit, like a Get Out, like a Split.
Or even, look at, if we can throw that graphic back up, even Insidious, which didn't have great reviews, worldwide made more than that. Again, 3 times its budget just on its opening weekend. This is what they're so good at doing. They market really well. They know how to sell a movie. They know how to make a movie look compelling. They tend to rate them properly for what audience is going to show up to them. Some of them PG-13, some of them are R. A lot of them are PG-13 because they're kind of going after that PG-13 weekend rush audience, knowing that it's not going to have a long shelf life. But, hats off to Blumhouse. We've talked about it here on the show before, but they know how to sell a movie, and they know how to make it for a price that they're going to make money back on it.
They know how to make it for a price that they're going to make money, and they often know how to make it well, at least in a way that appeals to the genre. Whether Truth or Dare does so much is a different story. Ready Player One is still hanging in there.
Ready Player One's still hanging in there. Dropped 53% in its 3rd weekend. It's at about $115 million domestically. It is officially the 17th Steven Spielberg film to make $100 million domestically. The first one in 10 years for him, believe it or not. It's hard to wrap your head around that. This is the first Spielberg film in a decade to make over $100 million here domestically. I mean, but he's been making smaller films.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say is like, he hasn't been making the big blockbuster films that he used to make necessarily. And this is the first one that was like sort of an old school, big event Steven Spielberg film that we've seen in a while.
In quite a while.
And it's doing very well.
It's doing well. Blockers, which was a top 5, it's opening last week. It stayed in the top 5. Not great news. It dropped 50% in its 2nd week. And we saw this with Game Night with comedies, particularly rated R comedies. You don't want to see necessarily a 2nd week drop like that because they generally rely on a longer run to make some of their money back. But it was budgeted at $20 million. It's approaching $40 million. It's gotten over $10 million overseas. So it's doing okay as far as, budget. It's not a smash hit, but it doesn't look like it's going to have the kind of longevity that Game Night, another R-rated comedy, had earlier this year in terms of, Game Night had an okay opening, but then really had staying power. With a 50% drop-off in week 2, I don't know if Blockers is going to have that same staying power. Also because the marketplace is vastly different for this movie than it was for Game Night, which opened in a much less competitive. You had Black Panther and pretty much nothing else when Game Night was out.
This weekend we have another comedy coming out in I Feel Pretty, the Amy Schumer film. And then the weekend after that, it's all bets are off for everybody. It's Infinity War. Forget it. Forget it.
And then who knows if people are going to remember the next week by the time that Blockers is still out. We're getting into that summer movie season. Things are going to get a lot more dense. And so, Blockers not necessarily a disappointment, but I think Universal maybe would have wanted a little bit higher of an opening weekend, maybe a bit of a smaller drop in week 2, but it'll probably make a tidy profit for them.
Yeah, we have to say a real quick congratulations to Paramount. I mean, we've talked about A Quiet Place already, but boy, they needed this.
They did.
They sure did, and they got it. And I gotta say, I'm kind of happy for them in a weird way.
It's like an underdog story.
Yeah,
it's just good to see them. Not only are they doing well, they're doing well with the movie. The film is. I'm happy for the filmmakers.
Yeah.
But you know what? No, I'm still angry at Paramount for the Annihilation thing. So I'm gonna say I'm happy for John Krasinski and Emily Blunt and everyone who worked on that movie and no one else.
You know what? I'm happy for anybody that's taking a beating and gets a little win. I really am. We've all been there where we're just like, God, Lord, give me one win.
I know,
and they got it.
There you go.
Grace Jones, Bloodlight, and Bammy is the greatest title of any film ever.
And it took the per screen crown. It was playing on 3 screens nationwide. This is a documentary. If you don't know Grace Jones, she's kind of a cult icon. She appeared in a lot of 80s movies. She was in A View to a Kill. She was in Conan.
She was a model. She dated Dolph Lundgren.
She's a musician. She is a jack of all trades. And
she was in Boomerang.
Yes.
You guys know Grace Jones.
I don't know if they do.
They know Grace Jones.
You would probably know her if you saw her.
You would know her if you saw her.
This is a documentary that kind of profiles her. She's kind of revisiting her heritage, and it was made last year. It's from the UK. It was made last year. It's debuting here this weekend in very, very limited release. Took the per screen crown. So if you're near one of those 3 screens that's playing the Grace Jones documentary, check it out. She's a very interesting, and I mean, just not just one facet: modeling, acting, music, just personality.
She's like one of those celebrities that she did a lot of things. She wasn't just a celebrity for being a celebrity.
Yeah.
But the force and fire of her personality, I think, was largely what made her. I mean, she's also remarkably beautiful.
Yeah.
Did not hurt.
No.
So Dan, we talked about it a little bit, but let's lay down the laws. Rampage, a hit or not?
So this was when I'm looking at the numbers, I was trying to figure out what to make of Rampage, because as I mentioned, it was expected to earn between $35 and $40 million at the box office. It came at the very low end of that projection, just barely clipped that $35 million, and only then when the actuals came in. Word of mouth, though, does seem to be positive, as indicated by the fact that it grew from Friday to Saturday at such a great rate. That 20% is, a lot of times you'll see a movie hold steady Friday to Saturday. That 20% jump is indicative of word of mouth, of more families going to see the movie, although that's a pretty intense movie for small kids. I don't know if I'd bring small kids to that.
I think it's too much for a very
But
little
it could have
one.
been that kids were, teenagers were taking their day off of school to go see it. So even though it opened at 35, low end of the tracking, it does seem like it could have some word of mouth going. So I was going to try to kind of compare it to The Rock, to other movies. So let's first of all look at kind of going back to summer of 2015 when San Andreas came out. Believe it or not, and this is hard to believe, but prior to that, there were a lot of questions about The Rock and whether he could carry a movie by himself, because he'd had some hits and he had some misses. There were a lot of people saying, like, he's good in the Fast and the Furious movies, but can he himself carry a blockbuster movie? San Andreas came out and proved to everyone that yes, indeed he can. That movie opened to $54 million and made almost $500 million worldwide off a budget of $110 million. So to talk about Rampage, I wanted to start with, let's look at The Rock's live action openings since then.
It's funny because no one, as we've been talking about, and we sort of teased at the top a little bit, no one is more motivated to show that he is in fact a star than The Rock. And I feel like his training in wrestling, where you really have to work for it, you have to work for the audience, you have to work for your fandom, you have to keep working for it. Yeah. That kind of, in a way, work ethic, he shares with a lot of the biggest stars out there. It served him really well. And I think it has he is an incredibly charismatic guy.
He is.
On screen in the best part of that movie. But boy, that's paid off in dividends for him.
It has. And let's, discounting Moana, because Moana, as you can see, a great movie. But I think, The Rock was certainly a key part of that. But that also had the Disney prestige. Yeah. I'm going to look at live action, which is kind of his bailiwick, if you will, as far as the persona of Dwayne The Rock Johnson. So let's look at his openings since San Andreas hit big back in summer of 2015. Fate of the Furious, obviously, a lot of people say, like, well, that's not really a Rock opening. I would argue that he is as big an opener in that franchise at this point as Vin Diesel or anyone else. Fate of the Furious, obviously a huge opening. This is domestic. And then Rampage opened almost identically to Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and Central Intelligence. However, I have asterisk Jumanji. That was its opening weekend. However, it opened the Wednesday prior to that, so that opening weekend probably would have been a lot higher had it opened on a Friday. Baywatch coming in at the low end, that opened on a Thursday, but still, that was a disappointing opening. So if you look at Jumanji, Rampage, Central Intelligence, largely or solely carried by The Rock or co-carried with The Rock and Kevin Hart, opening at about $35 million.
Jack Black was great in that movie.
Jack Black was great in that movie, but they were definitely leaning into The Rock.
For sure. No, for sure. And rightfully so. That was also, in my opinion, a really fun popcorn movie.
It was, and I don't think that Rampage is going to perform like Jumanji.
I don't think it will either.
We've talked about it on the show. Like, that movie was a phenomenon, just both in timing and just the alchemy of the cast and everything. It's not realistic to expect that Rampage is going to perform like that. If we're looking at how Central Intelligence performed, that one earned $125 million domestically, over $215 million worldwide. But, and this is the caveat, Central Intelligence had a budget of about $50 million. So those grosses worked great for that movie. Rampage has a budget of about $120 million. So the bar on what it needs to earn worldwide and domestically is a lot higher on this movie than it is on Central Intelligence. So looking at it domestically and worldwide, The Rock wants Rampage to perform a lot more like Jumanji and a lot less like Central Intelligence, because while Central Intelligence was a hit, it didn't generate the kind of gross that Rampage is going to need to turn a nice profit.
You know, I feel like, though, that Rampage has a far better chance of performing internationally than Central Intelligence did, because it's largely driven by action.
Yeah.
There are giant monsters fighting each other. They're animals, but they're giant in this case, fighting each other. There's a lot of things that has sort of an international appeal.
I agree. And that's why I wanted to broaden the scope and look not just domestic, because I agree. Not only does Rampage, I think, play much better to a worldwide audience than Central Intelligence, but The Rock is a global movie star. So I wanted to look at how it's doing worldwide. So these are the top 5 worldwide openings this year. And Rampage actually, again, opened almost identically to Pacific Rim Uprising. Now, Pacific Rim is a movie that is struggling to get over $300 million worldwide at the moment. It did have a larger budget than Rampage, $30 million more. It opened in a few more countries, so you could say even though it's about the same number, Rampage has a little bit of a leg up. But at the same time, Rampage has a great disadvantage, which is that in less than 2 weeks, day and date globally, Infinity War is opening. That is something that Pacific Rim did not have to deal with.
Yeah.
That's something that almost no movie has to deal with right now. So again, if you're The Rock, you're going to hope that Rampage can weather the storm the way that Jumanji kind of was able to, but it was on the aftermath of The Last Jedi.
Yes.
You're hoping that there's room in the marketplace for Rampage to continue to play internationally at the same time as Infinity War. I'm not really convinced. It's all going to be up to how it does this next weekend, I think, as to the long-term success of this movie. It opened at $55 million in China. That's not a bad opening weekend. I think what The Rock is going to be looking at in week 2 is Rampage going to perform in week 2 like Ready Player One did, where the first weekend kind of kicked off a lot of the excitement, and it held really strongly in the second weekend, because we'll see how it does here. We'll see how it does internationally. But the book is still very much not written on Rampage, and so much of it has to do with, and what I tried to pull was a comp, and strangely enough, it was San Andreas. San Andreas had a $110 million budget. That's $10 million less than Rampage. I found a report. It reportedly netted Warner Brothers $88 million in profit off a global gross of $475 million once all the ancillary markets were factored in. That means that Rampage has a lot of work to do, because it's probably got to get to 375-ish globally.
It's not only next week is going to be a big part of the story, but then in addition to that, no critics, nobody that did the press junket, nobody has seen Infinity War yet.
Yeah.
Disney is 100% holding it back until the premiere. So largely, I feel like that story depends also. Look, the way it's pre-selling, Infinity War is just going to do bonkers bananas box office. Mm-hmm. But if it's also great and people love it and they want to see it multiple times, there's just almost no room for anything other than the next big, huge blockbuster.
Yeah.
In a way, it's just going to devour all of the space. If it's great, and we hope it is, it'll be interesting.
At the very least, to save, not face, but I think to put a good face on it, you at least want Rampage to do the budget times 2, which would be $250 million internationally, which, again, that's probably likely. But if you want to really rack up those profits and not just talk about breaking even, it has a lot of work to do. And I think it's got to do a lot of that work this week, which it very well may. Again, looking at the cinema score, that strong word of mouth, I think that indicates that there are going to be a lot of people saying, like,
not a lot of competition.
Not a lot of competition, not in that market even at all. I mean,
not
Super
at
Troopers 2, which is kind of a younger skewing movie, but again, that's for people like my age, that when the first Super Troopers came out, that's not the 13 and 14-year-olds now necessarily. I think unless they have older brothers and sisters that liked that movie. I think
very young parents.
Very young parents. Yeah, very extremely young parents. I think that a lot of what's the book on Rampage is going to be written this week upcoming. It's certainly not a runaway. Again, we talked about Ready Player One the first weekend. Like, okay, cautiously optimistic. We'll see what happens, and then it did great in the second weekend. If you're The Rock, that's what you want to see this week with Rampage.
Yes, 100%. We'll see what happens. I mean, I think it stands a chance, again, mostly due to the lack of competition, because everyone cleared a very wide berth to make room for the Avengers to reteam.
And they were smart to move that release date up a week, because they would have had no room to breathe, and it turns out they probably are going to need it. They would have had no room if they'd stuck with their original release date, which was this week, with Infinity War moving up and opening the week after.
Yeah.
So smart move on the part of the studio to give it a shot at some breathing room.
100%. So let's look at what's going on domestically overall this year.
Yeah, domestic charts. This was actually a lot of motion on the domestic front this week. A Quiet Place becomes the 5th movie this year. Yesterday, with the estimates, it hadn't quite cracked $100 million. It came in a little bit over the estimated number, so it cracked $100 million once all the money was counted. Jumps onto the list at number 5. Ready Player One jumps up to 2. Tomb Raider drops out. We knew that was going to happen pretty soon. A bunch of stuff moving down, up and down. Wrinkle in Time still trying to crawl towards $100 million. Game Night just kind of sitting pretty there at 8. It knows it's going to be gone, but that's a pretty good total for that movie. And kind of the quiet before the storm a little bit, because there's going to be something that's going to jump in probably at number 2 or 3. Probably number 2 on that chart.
Can we pull the chart up for just one more second, JT?
Sure.
Okay, so we need A Quiet Place to earn a little bit more in order to top 50 Shades there.
Oh, it'll definitely do that.
And I am looking forward to the day that it does that, because you know what would delight me at the end of this year,
What's
Dan, is if at least 5 of those films were really solid, quality films. That would make me so happy.
That would be nice.
Don't you think that would be nice?
It would be nice. And, we give blockbusters a lot of crap, but some of the terrible ones have been sinking as of late. Unfortunately, some of the good ones have too, like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
But I think when you look at the top 5 from last year, on volume, a lot of them were better maybe than they have been in years past.
But several of those blockbusters that are accounted for, Black Panther's a really good movie.
Great
I'm
movie.
fine with it.
Yeah.
I'm great with it performing.
And I'm going to
that
go out
way.
on a limb and say that'll be in the top 5 at the end of the year.
I think
Unless
it probably
the box office explodes in the next 9 months. I think it's fairly safe to say Black Panther's going to be in the top
I think
5.
it'll be there, but I would be so happy if even just half. It'd be great if all 10.
Yeah,
Just half were really quality films. I'd be delighted.
that would be great.
Let us look at the world.
The world, the opposite of the domestic chart, kind of quiet. Peter Rabbit hops over the Maze Runner. Thank you. And it's close to breaking $300 million. It's still kind of wrapping up its global run. Pretty nice little sum for that movie. It wasn't a hugely budgeted film. Did well in the UK, did well here. And really the world is just kind of silently awaiting Thanos to come in and wreak havoc on that chart. I'm sure we'll discuss it after Infinity War opens. We'll see where it lands.
Just like big Infinity Gauntlet
just a big
all
Infinity
over
Gauntlet right over that. Sorry, Tomb Raider, and probably Pacific Rim, and who knows what else. You're toast.
Yeah, you're out of
soon.
there.
You're out of there.
Deadpool's coming for you. Infinity War's coming
Solo's
for you.
coming for you.
Somos.
Somos.
You know what that we haven't mentioned also? We've talked a lot about Sony and Jumanji and how much they needed that film, but their little Peter Rabbit also performed
the
very
little bunny
well
that
for
could.
Yeah.
It has performed very well. It had very hopping legs.
Yeah.
That movie did all around
Hopped
the
all
world.
along for Sony. They're happy too.
They're very happy with Peter Rabbit. I'm sure we'll see a sequel.
Probably.
This week, you mentioned Amy Schumer, I Feel Pretty. That's the biggest super wide opening this week on over 3,000 screens. I mentioned Super Troopers 2. That's opening on about 2,000 screens. And then there's a thriller named Traffic with a K, not the Michael Douglas movie from 2000 that should have won the Oscar, 2001. Just not Gladiator. Anyway, that's a whole other thing for me. That is also opening on 1,000 screens. And then next week is we're gonna wreak havoc so much havoc that I'm not even going to be here next week.
Exactly. So just so you guys know, there will be no charting with Mr. Dan Murrell next week because Dan will be out for the week.
I'll be gone, yes.
We will do a little catch up on our morning show on Screen Junkies Universe just on how Rampage fared. And then we will be back the following week talking about Infinity War. And I bet there's going to be something to talk about. What do you think?
I predict that there's going to be a lot of charts to make and a lot of records to check and a lot of everything else, because much like with Star Wars, you can get and Black Panther and all of these movies that have opened so huge, you can guess what people are going to do, but this is the motto of the show. There's no tracking enthusiasm.
There really isn't. And again, I mean, I think the big thing is that no one has seen it yet. So we really don't know what is there. It's another 2.5 hour extravaganza. We will see what it delivers. Just so you guys know and give him a little credit and love on Twitter and the other places, Dan makes all of the charts himself. I have zero Photoshop skills at all. And I am doubly impressed, and that is why we are literally unable to do it without him. We just cannot
thank you,
even.
JT.
We cannot even make the charts. So give him a little love for that, among other things.
Yes, my plan has worked perfectly.
You are indispensable in so many ways. We are going to miss you terribly next week, but
I'll keep tracking the numbers. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Anything falls through the cracks, we'll catch it in 2 weeks. It'll be a super, just camp out now, because it's going to be a super long edition of charting. There's going to be like 50 charts.
All of the charts.
All the charts in 2 weeks.
Well, I'm excited for that, and we will see you guys then.
Yes.